So after structural theory, we come to psychoanalytic theory. Here in psychoanalytic theory, we'll see how Sigmund Freud tries to give a structure to the mind of man. What Freud studies is that human beings are differentiated from animals. One is something that people already know from the thinking capacity of a man, is what distinguishes him from other people. So, one is his thinking capacity. But what Sigmund Freud also gave you is that he says a child who is born of a man has put certain dependencies on his parents, and these depend because of these dependencies. He says that a human child is born prematurely. A human child is born prematurely. So what you see in other organisms, the dependencies end within certain months. Within months, the any kid becomes an adult of animals, and dependence finishes within a few months of birth. And even then, there is a lot of capacity in the child born, even of a bird. Even the offsprings of birds do not depend too much on their parents. But this human child is born prematurely, and he has not one but many dependencies. He depends not just for one thing on his or her parents, for just not just for food. There is not just a biological connection. He does not biologically depend on his or her parents, but the second most important thing, which takes very long for him to depend on his or her parents, is his emotions, his pleasure and pain. The two idea of pleasure and pain. A child depends too much for his pleasures or for his pain on his or her parents, and this takes too long, not a few months, but years together. Taking biological idea itself, say you guys are in your 20s, some of you are in your 20s, and some have crossed 18. You all are still biologically dependent on your parents for food. Your food is supplied by your parents. So think of the birds who feed their kids for a few months and then they are able to fly and search for their food on their own. But this dependence in humans continues for very long. So he says they are born too prematurely. So even in 20s, human kids are dependent biologically on their parents for food, for care, for shelter. And then the second point is the dependence of emotions, pain and pleasure. This never ends. I can give you an example how this never ends. Think of your mothers. Your mothers are mothers of more than two children or two children, but still depend on their mothers, who is your grandmother, emotionally. So, whenever there is an event of pain or pleasure, they require their mothers. And when there is something that takes too much on their head, like because of your father, your mothers require your grandfather. So, this dependence only ends with the death of these people. And then also, it doesn't actually end, it's like a forced end. It's been forced on you, and then forever there is that vacuum that can never be filled up, this emotional vacuum. So this is why Sigmund Freud says that human kids, the children of man, are born prematurely. Is this basic idea clear? It's not very difficult to understand. Idea of dependence biologically and idea of dependence emotionally. Now for understanding of these, for basically mostly understanding of these emotional dependence and also biological dependence. He does study biological dependence as well. He delves deeper into how your mind works, how your thinking capacity works, and if thinking capacity works as a man of knowledge, you may reach somewhere, but still your emotions will keep you hooked to that idea of your mothers and fathers. Freud begins with his contribution of dividing the idea of mind into the layers. And this he makes use of the term, give me a moment. He gives the example of an iceberg and says that mind is divided into three parts, which you may already know. The first he calls this part, which you can see, which you can figure out mostly, is your conscious part of the brain. Conscious part, not of the brain. Don't use the word brain in place of mind. It's the mind, not the brain. Brain is something concrete, something that has a tangible existence. Mind does not have a tangible existence. Tangible existence means something that you can feel and touch. So you have surgeries of the brain, but you cannot have surgery of the mind. Then everything would have been fine had there been a surgery kind of a thing of the mind. There would have no problems like these that we study in psychoanalysis. So the first part he calls the tip of the iceberg is the conscious part of the mind. This conscious part of the mind is that part which you are able to clearly understand where it's coming from. The second part comes from this portion. The second part he calls, which lies just under the conscious, he calls it subconscious mind. And the third part, which is the largest part under the second part, is that which is inaccessible and because of that has been called unconscious. So the first part is the most accessible part of your mind. Even this part is difficult to completely have an access of, but still there is an access to it. Now we'll take examples of an idea and start thinking of how each can work, how conscious, subconscious, unconscious works in each. So we work with an example. Mm, you have an exam tomorrow, for example. It's your exam tomorrow, and what you're consciously doing is that you are preparing for the exams. Now that's the conscious part, that you are preparing for it. The preparation is conscious. You open your books, you open your books, you study well, you revise it. That's what the conscious part of your mind is doing. Conscious also engages not just the mind. Mind has to work together with the body. Now you have to bear in mind, how does the body function in each of these levels that I'm talking about. Okay, one is how mind works, and second is I'm giving you the details of how mind is working. You will have to be careful also how in each uh, functioning does the body work. So you are preparing for the exams. You study, you prepare notes, you learn, and you do some exercises. That's what your conscious part of the mind is doing. And second is something that the subconscious is doing. What's the subconscious doing? The subconscious is that layer which gives you certain laws, which gives you rules, and tells you what is right and what is wrong. Okay, so in your exams, you think cheating is not a good idea, it's wrong. That comes from your subconscious. Or uh, for your mother, you sit on the books for 7 hours, and your mother thinks you are spending 7 hours on your books, but you are only spending 1 hour out of that on books. So, what that makes you feel is your subconscious working. Think how the body works. That is subconscious. Mentally, it's subconscious working that's pushing you to think something is wrong, something is right. It's the subconscious. The third is the unconscious, which is inaccessible. You don't know how that works. You don't know how it's engaging with the idea of you preparing or you cheating or you thinking of your mother that I'm being wrong with them, I'm being deceitful. Or also thinking that I am through preparing for this competitive exam, for example, I am trying to fulfill the dreams of my parents. That too comes from the right thinking you think is right for me, that I need to do what my parents think must be done. Okay, fulfilling the dreams of your parents. But this last part is inaccessible part. You don't know how it works. That too enters into your studies. How does it enter your studies? You're dreaming about the paper being snatched because your time was over, or you're thinking that it's the morning of the exam and you are not able to reach your examination center because there is a curfew outside. Okay. Or any other fears associated with exam. These are called game jitters in general common understanding. They're called game jitters. Before you enter the game, it gives you some jitters. They're called game jitters. So far, so good. Any questions? Any questions? Shall I move on then? Okay. So that's the basic idea that Sigmund Freud gives about the mind. The three parts of the mind and how they work. This also comes under a structural analysis because there are types drawn for you, that there are three layers in your mind. There are these units which have a particular defined set of relationships with each other. Where does that come from? Structuralism, right? Units working in relation to each other and therefore giving rise to something. And this is how the whole system works, the functioning of this system. Therefore, Freud can be taken as a structuralist. Now, what is the function? What does Freud basically do? Is that all he does? That he gives you the three parts of the mind and how they work? No, that's not all. But he studies unconscious and scrutinizes this part, which is hard to locate. Because you have access to the conscious mind from your words, from your actions. Same is the case with the subconscious. If somebody speaks to you, your words and actions will speak. If you're a good person, you follow the law, you follow the rules, you follow what is right, or you don't. So your words and actions can tell us what your subconscious is like. This is also called a policing mechanism. Policing mechanism that is there inside you. But how about the unconscious? Your words and actions, again, help a psychoanalytic theorist or a practitioner of psychology to reach your unconscious. But the language is not the same as you have in these cases. In the first and the second case, the signifier is quite apparent that you have, as was given by Saussure. The signifiers are very clear. There is just single signified to any signifier that um, your actions are that um, you spend some amount of your money as alms on every Friday. That's your action. That speaks something. That's there is just one signified that you are trying to please your creator. The action has one meaning, signified, not that you have a lot of money and you want to spend it somewhere and that your bank is not able to keep that money because it's exceeding some limit. So the signifier can only have one signified. Your actions can only have one signified. But in case of unconscious, the language spoken is totally different and works more like how Jacobson's metaphor works. Metaphor is the vertical relationship. Vertical relationship is paradigmatic relationship. It works like that. So the language used in your dream may be something else, but they may refer to the same thing. It may not always be as clear as this that you are dreaming about your paper being snatched, but or it's the same thing, your paper is being snatched. What actual fear lies underneath? It's not simply the fear of the exams, but something lies deeper, deeper, deeper into your brain that you basically fear. And that fear comes out of some other fear. So the relationship that the psychologist digs out is through this paradigmatic relationship between one signifier and another. Clear? So, according to Freud, he says that it's the unconscious part, this major part of your mind, that governs your behavior. How you behave is governed by your unconscious. And through the same thing, through by giving the same idea that your unconscious is what creates your or manages or defines your behavior, is where he problematizes the whole idea. If behavior depends on something that has no language, then how can your behavior be defined? So therefore, this is where he problematizes all notions that were there before him. If unconscious defines the behavior, everything else starts being questioned. Why does everything else start being questioned? Because by doing this, what he is doing is that he is questioning all that existed before the systems of theology. Theology says, any religion says that your actions define everything, even your behavior. Your actions will take you to heaven or hell. And those actions are derived from the conscious part of the mind, that you consciously do wrong or you consciously do right. Then he also starts then questioning philosophy, because all philosophy so far, this you must already be familiar with this, refers to the 15th century ideology, 15th century philosophy, say the idea of Renaissance, the idea of enlightenment, the idea of humanism. Humanism believes that human is the center, and humans, because of this capacity, are able to achieve anything. That through experimentation and through science, application of scientific ideas, man is able to achieve anything. So here again, everything depends on consciousness. The knowledge you have applied over everything around you helps in inventions and discoveries, and this is how what results in the betterment of human condition. That's philosophy. So that again results in a jolt. That again results in a jolt because philosophy now had no idea how unconscious works. But everything now on starts being questioned through. There must be something like unconscious in philosophy, theology, everything else. And then the third place where it was applied was literary criticism. All criticism so far relied upon consciousness. Say, for example, we studied realism and how realism works, right? And realism tells you how the relationships between different sets of characters are, how a rich has a certain relationship with the poor. That's consciously what's happening on the societal level, consciously how the rich is working with the poor. Then subconscious would be, is he doing right? Is he doing wrong? Is the poor in return doing right or doing wrong? But where does the unconscious lie? Unconscious is what drives both people to do what they do, what pulls them towards an action that they do. There is a deeper reason that results in any action that they take, any move that they make. So, this is the unfigured part, even to this day. There is no clear access to this unconscious. Right? Everybody believes there is an unconscious, which is the largest, the biggest part of the mind, but still there is no idea. Still, there is no clear idea of how it actually has a structure. What structure does it have? What language does it have a single language? Everybody, every psychoanalytic theorist tries to give his or her own way of expression how it may work. There is only a may in psychoanalysis. There is no clear cut, established idea of what it can be. These are only what we call conjectures. It may be so. Okay? The first work that Sigmund Freud wrote, it was Studies on Hysteria. This was way back when Sigmund Freud had not studied so deeply the idea of mind. This before he came to this idea. He studied hysteria and hysteria only in women. This work was published in 1895 and he worked on this together with Joseph Breuer. Joseph Breuer is a very important psychoanalyst who later on had some issues with each other later on and they parted their ways. Earlier they used to work on everything together. They were doctors. And together in this work they reasoned out what is the etiology of neurosis. So where does this neurosis generate? Neurosis is the neurotic behavior where your body functions abnormally. That's called neurosis. Body functions abnormally without a particular reason. So they were trying to figure out what is the etiology, underlying reasons of this neurosis. And they wanted to find out, to this time, the idea of neurosis was that it's generated because of an emotional excitement and these no emotional excitement and this can be sexual too. So that was the idea of neurosis till that time, before this before studies on hysteria took place. Thus, all neurosis derived from the disturbances that basically had their roots in sexuality of a person, the sexual functioning, the disturbances in the sexual functioning resulted in neurosis. That was the idea at that point in time. This is back in 19th century. And Freud tried to uh, also in this study, he also tried to avoid the use of hypnosis was used as a way of treating these patients. He tried to avoid hypnosis and look for some other ways of treatments in favor of what he called psychoanalysis. This is where he comes to the idea of language. Every theory that we do, every theory of humanism, every humanistic theory is only an hypothesis. It's not based on scientific principles. That's why one after the other critics come and reject the previous critic. In science, even in science, there are certain principles that one can disregard and come up with some other principles. They study something based on their own experimentation. Say, for example, you have Newton. Newton also talks about how the physical principles work in universe. Does that mean that he actually went and studied how planetary motions occur? Did he study the planetary motions or touched them or applied some activity, did some activity, some exercise that would prove that when other object comes in the path of a motion, then reverse action, something takes place. So that experimentation did not require him to go to that space and then figure out how planetary motions happen. Similarly, if Sigmund Freud is structurally analyzing the mind, he is giving structure to the mind. It's based on certain experimentation. In experimentations, he found out that in people there are three kinds of three ways in which the mind works, and he divides those ways, those manners. He gives them types. Typology is one of the way in which structuralism works. Okay, and it's not that Freud is somebody who is the god of psychoanalysis today. No, not many apply a Freudian theory today. There are new theories now in psychoanalysis that are studied, and what Lacan did is also very significant, and he did it something in something that was done around 1970s, 80s, which also means that his theory is still plausible. And it's not the same with Freud. A lot of Freud has already been re- rejected and disregarded. And his daughter Anna Freud tries to support the arguments of Freud and also gives them a language which is applicable to the modern world. So Anna Freud working on the same theory in a manner that would be applicable to the modern ways of thinking is also there. Then talk about digital space. A new experimentation would be required to study the digital space and how that affects the conscious part of your mind, the subconscious, the unconscious. Everything has changed. It has even led to deeper impacts on your unconscious. And Freud says unconscious frames your behavior, and since this digital space has changed your structure of unconscious, also means that your behavior patterns have changed. They have. So this is how we prove that yes, some part of Freud is right and holds even today. I hope that answers your question, Huda. If it did not, you can ask me again. The class is about to end. We'll take questions.